my name's Rosalind, or Roz, and yeah, I'm very happy to be back here at Earthdance. Very special place. In the world of contact improvisation. Yeah, I'm happy to also share with you some of the research that I've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, especially as it's kind of now, in some degree, completed. Like I've just finished this PhD.
Dr. Roz.
And it is very fresh, so it's fresh in the sense that I have literally kind of just had my defense and they've passed me, but you know there's still a few little amendments to do. PhD takes quite a long time, so yeah, I'm happy to be at the end of it. And yeah, just to give you a little bit of context about me. I encountered contact improvisation in Dartington. I was a student at Dartington College of Arts, and I studied quite a lot of body-mind centering and skin and release technique and authentic movement that also shaped my practice. I've been making choreographic work and some of a visual arts background. And all of that's kind of shaped how I've approached research, how I've approached the practice of contact improvisation. Please come in, please make yourself comfortable. There are more coffees in the cupboards over there. You're welcome to come and sit up here at the front. And as I speak, please do, if you need to take care of yourself, if you need to move, if you need to wriggle, if you need to stand, please feel free to do that. So I began my research with a couple of questions about touch. I had a question of how do we touch in contact improvisation? Is there a kind of language or specific vocabulary that we can identify in this practice? And that was also with the question of how do we experience touch? How do practitioners experience touch? And alongside that question, I had another question, which was, how does touch enable an encounter with otherness? Otherness. It's a term used in philosophy, often is referred to that which is outside of ourselves, that which is foreign, the East, which is then classified by the West as the East, and is such a way. So that was it, which is object, only becomes object because it's defined by a subject. So I looked at this notion of otherness through the lens of new materialist thinking. And this is a kind of philosophy that is interested in how we make matter, or how matter and meaning are made. How does meaning come about in the world, and how do things materialize? How do things emerge? And in this new materialist thinking, which is quite exciting, it's kind of a new feminist movement, a theoretical paradigm that it's been developed by a number of scientists and philosophers. It wants to give value to the agency of the stuff of the world. Stuff that's not just kind of human thinking minds or the Westerners that classify the Easterners, but the material stuff that we live with, and also the immaterial. So the rocks, the stones, the thoughts, the air. And new materialist thinking kind of believes that the environmental stuff of the world, the rocks, the stones, the concrete, has agency. So it's alive and it's shaping, it's relational. So there's relationships that are ongoing and constantly informing what is becoming in the world. So Bob's experience of this talk will likely change if I was to sit next to him in some slight way, because there's a relational presence that is informing on some subtle level, perhaps, how we think and feel. And I'm talking on a human spectrum because I am human, and that's all I can do. So I was quite inspired by a quantum physicist. I mentioned her in my class the other day, Karen Barad. She, they, them is a quantum physicist who's very much shaped new materialist thinking, and they say that so much happens in a touch. An infinity of others, other beings, other spaces, other times are aroused. Had a little jumping influence.
Wait a second.
We can just shift it this way a little bit. So I think it might be the wire actually that's shifted and pulled this way.
I think it has its own
One agenda to slide to the right. Oh yeah. Karen Barad wrote an article called "Touching the Inhuman, that Therefore I Am," and that's where this quote comes from. And I appreciate the way in which they refer to projection, ideas, imagination, memory, that might be stimulated when we come into touch, or when there is even the possibility that there might be touch with another world coming up. And I just got a few images that perhaps continue this reflection on new materialism. This is a picture of me in a logging site in Victoria, Australia. And the logging site was burning as I danced and improvised in this site. I have a practice not just of dancing in touch with all you beautiful beings, but also with environmental matter that shaped my research. So it was not just about touch with humans, but also about touch with soil, with stone, with tree, with water. And this site had such a strong influence on my state of emotion. I was filled with grief and anger, and that shaped my movement. It shaped what was in a way, although dance has this ephemerality about it. You know, it's there one moment, it's gone the next. But it is something in the world. We place our bodies in space. And so this site and its energy and its disintegration and its danger informed and shaped my movement. These are some drawings. So just again speaking back to kind of just giving you some insights now also into my methodology, the way in which I did my research. I have a practice of moving and then drawing, mark making, that brings the experience of sensation, of meeting, of moving onto the page. And this perhaps kind of just reflects on some of the unknown, or some of the questions or some of the emotions, some of the liveliness that could be encountered when we're dancing contact improvisation, or when I was dancing contact improvisation once. And all of this stuff, the stuff that's kind of bubbling inside, I started to think of as this otherness. So rather than thinking about otherness as a foreign or object outside of oneself, I started to think about otherness as something that I encountered within, that the subject encounters within the interiority of himself. The questions. How close can I come? How much weight can I give? Does this person want to dance with me? And yeah, although contact improvisation, as Steve Paxton brought it about, that was intended to focus on physics of our bodies moving in relationship to this great force of gravity and other physical forces of momentum, inertia, and friction. My research emerged at a time where there's a lot of dialogue in our field about consent, about social justice, about how do we, and so I was kind of started thinking about this otherness as all of this stuff that we have to negotiate within ourselves, and we do in relationship, or we struggle to. And well, Steve Paxton kind of brought it back to, okay, let's leave this stuff out for a little while. All of these differences that we meet with, these cultural differences and emotional challenges. Can we drop it for a while? In this question of otherness, then I was starting to kind of deal with some of these problems and think about how do we negotiate that on the level of touch. So I was holding these two questions of, is there a specific vocabulary of touch? And maybe are there ways in which we touch that can support how we negotiate this otherness that might be encountered within? An otherness that could range from strong feelings of attraction or abjection, fear, excitement, pleasure, arousal. Is there a specific kind of way in which we use touch that we could maybe use to negotiate this trouble that might be enlivened by the possibility of touch or the presence of touch in contact improvisation? Are we going further to the right? So the research on this level of, is there a vocabulary of touch, started in Freiburg at the Contact Festival there that happens every year. And I started to ask teachers and long-term practitioners contact, is there a kind of touch you know through practicing contact improvisation? And I gathered a whole range of descriptions. These are a little bit small. You're really welcome to come closer if you wish. I'm going to just kind of maybe drop in a few, and I got a whole range of adjectives: disgusting touch, brushing, rolling, bumping, sloughing, gliding, sliding, weight giving, listening touch, that's just receiving information, not asking or expecting anything. Contact without touch, pulling, pushing. So I gathered these different descriptions. And I kind of loosely grouped them into some vague categories, which were listening touch, surface touch, and deep touch. And these kind of just acknowledging that touch at the same time, it might be listening while at the same time giving weight. I held these categories quite loosely, but they gave me a way to dive in deeper, to look deeper at, well, what is listening? What do we do when we're listening? And then I gathered a lab group, like a research group, focus group of 8 dancers in Berlin, where I'm based. And we spent some time dancing for long periods, practicing listening, trying to practice listening, and then reflecting on our experiences. And I would use a kind of phenomenological approach that involved speaking a little bit like in authentic movement. For those that might have practiced authentic movement, we try to speak in the present tense as if the experience of movement is happening now. And rather than kind of grab all of the experience that these dancers had, I just asked them to speak about a snapshot, like a picture, and describe it in as much depth and detail. So I gathered thick descriptions of touch experience and movement experience, acknowledging that in the dance these two senses come together, movement and touch. So these were some of the starting points for investigating listening, the adjectives. Touch that is not wanting, touch that is not asking or expecting anything. Touch that is just receiving and reading information. I don't know whether it was quite from just the research with the lab group in the studio context, or some of the research that I was starting to do outside, or some of the reading that I was engaging with, the theory, the new materialist thinking. But I started to think about bodies as collections of force, rather than as individual units, as collections of force and of the matter outside, and the humans that I was with, as these great collections of force unknown to me, but influencing me in some shape or form.
Are you saying thought or force?
Force, like energy, like, and I was inspired to think with space. There's a woman called Leah Basel who wrote The Politics of Listening, and proposes space as a way of recognizing our being with difference, as a way of reconciling with difference. And as a way of perhaps being with the unknown and the difficulties of conflict, or of histories of conflict, of kind of holding a space. And it's super interesting in the sense that I started my research in COVID. There's this implicit rule that there be space and distance between us. And I was influenced not just by Leah Basel, but a number of other thinkers on this notion of space, and the research with listening. In my experience, I was sensing and feeling this kind of telescoping of my awareness, especially in practices of arriving, of being outdoors, of doing less, but just landing on the earth, and being with this huge expanse of space where I could feel and sense the interrelationships of the environment. In some way, just like the wind blowing through the trees, some kind of real sense of the relationship that something's emerging, a sound is emerging. And I think in sometimes when we're in these boxed spaces, at least my experience of living in an apartment in Berlin is sometimes of being in a boxed unit, and that my life is very separate from my neighbours. Yeah, so this aspect of space started to play into how I was moving and embodying and exploring this notion of listening. And those that came to my class yesterday, you'll know that we played with hovering, this notion of hovering. Bringing in a bit more space into awareness to be with all that we are. The emotions, the excitement, the fears, the questions of what could be in this interaction. So I used and I drew upon the reflections from my colleagues that were dancers that I worked with in the lab, my experience of dancing outdoors, to start to develop and play with a vocabulary of touch, to identify, what are the things that we do when we listen, taking from their reflections, the other dancers' reflections, from my own reflections and experiences of moving outdoors, of doing less. So I started to develop this vocabulary, and as you can see, these are, in a way, a bit like Nancy's glyphs, the underscore, like symbols that refer to touch techniques that I've named and evolved in how I'm moving, and how I'm touching, and how I'm now teaching. Maybe I speak to this. There's a couple here listening with hands that I've separated out. We did a little bit of listening with hands in my class yesterday, of just bringing a presence and touch that's not wanting or expecting anything. But I feel like it's really important to separate the hands out as a practice in contact improvisation, because we use the hands so functionally, and the hands, unlike most parts of the body, the hands and the soles of the feet are not covered in hair, as with some parts of the genitals. They're not covered in hair, and so these parts have very fast-wired sensory receptors that travel into the nervous system and pass information to the nervous system very quickly, much quicker than other parts in the body. So we're very efficient and dexterous with the hands, and we can be. But to practice just receiving information through the hands is something that we're in a way undoing all of this functional. I go to take what I want, or I go to wash the dishes, to kind of change this way of using part of the body. Requires some practice. And listening, touch, accompanying, identify this as what we do in a way when we tune with another person or another world, of just being with, and not necessarily, it doesn't actually have to require touch, but this constant presence. And I feel that in terms of listening, this constancy, a continuity of presence can yield a greater sense of relief, like that there's a continuity of space and presence. And maybe the only problem with listening, or practicing listening, is that it can bring to awareness what's already happening. Maybe some of the more subtle levels of experience. So for me, I remember practicing listening and feeling like all of my thought patterns or feelings of anxiety might just kind of bubble up much more. So it becomes louder, this interior thinking world. And that there comes in this importance of consistency or of continuous presence in a way to like, that this is okay, that this stuff doesn't necessarily need to be held onto, but can be in and amongst the space that I am with. This makes more sense a second. If you don't understand, it's okay. And as you are dancers here, maybe many of you body workers also, perhaps you can also use the skin, the touch, the sense of touch that you have to play with these different touch techniques that I'm sharing with you as I'm speaking. Or with your partner next to you, or the neighbour. So I'm going to just try to talk a little bit through this touch vocabulary that developed from my research, which was a significant outcome of investigating these vague categories of listening touch, surface touch, and deep touch. And as I thought with collections of force, rather than, of the body as collections of force, of the world that we are already in touch with as collections of force influencing me or influencing others, I started to change this kind of category of surface touch into light touch as a way of thinking about the density of bodies and matter. I felt like light touch was more attuned and appropriate to think about this notion of space, or thinking with space, feeling with space, as well as all of the more that we are, the thoughts, the emotions, the questions, the blood, the fat. And maybe just to say that surface touch had come from like all these descriptions of rolling, bumping, sliding, of surface touch. But I started to think with space and with these collections of force and with the environment. And I was really influenced by moving in water. So much so that I went to Mexico. I spent some time working with some of the contact improvisers that have developed contact improvisation in water. And this immersion or movement in water was a really great reference for feeling with another substance that's different from earth and different from air, that has some kind of maybe more lightness to it. And I could sense how this world, this continuous world, was changing the state and transforming my body-mind in many ways. I would relax. My ability to spread out expanded. My ability to move in omnidirectional ways expanded. So there was a lot of freedom that I felt and a lot of relaxation that changed my movement in water. By the touch of water. And I started to think about the agency of water, its influence on movement, of momentum, changing an ability to move on, and also the immersion or the globality of being in an environment of like surrounded by a substance. And so I started to play with kind of recreating the world in water outside in the studio. There's a practice called skin and release technique where they work with what's called totality imagery. So you imagine a pool that's inside you, but also that's outside and surrounding you. So you move then into the space or into the pool that's both within you and around you. And I noticed how much this immersion for me was creating a sense of safety, of release. And I was like, okay, can I recreate this in the studio? And I started to play with imagery of air, of softness, of clouds, of dissolving. And this developed a number of techniques that I call dissolving, I call soft touch. And these were techniques that I felt were valuable in some sense that they're supporting a sense of like non-attachment, of letting go of this content of thought or of the mind. Like, and by changing the entire state of my body-mind, I noticed that how this would change not just my interactions with others, but other people that I started to guide in labs into these practices of dissolving, of softening into a whole global state air. And I think that there's something of worth acknowledging in terms of my experiences in water. Like I come from a background of being a swimmer. Like I was a competitive swimmer at some point. And like to be in water for me already was a comfortable environment. Whereas for some people it wouldn't be like that. So my ability to kind of dissolve or unfold in water is changed by my history and my memories and my upbringing. And as I kind of played with like all of these practices in the studio, I was also wanting to recreate a situation where other people could safely relax and yield into maybe a bit more acceptance. And I like this quote, which in a way talks about this kind of ability to yield and unfold. And it's from Erin Manning, who wrote a book called The Politics of Touch. Manning comes up with this great term called exfoliation. And this, in a way, talks to this notion of unfolding like our state of mind into the world. Exfoliation underscores the importance of conceiving the body as a moving sensuous process that multiplies, expands, dissolves and displaces itself through touch towards other bodies, surfaces and spaces, creating and occupying new spaces in its movement of desire. For Manning, this thing of exfoliating kind of, for me, refers to like, the feeling states that are in the body can come out, and maybe they come out anyway, but to be able to express your emotions or to communicate, this doesn't feel so good, or to like unfold in a way that rather than I just desire, I can actually be with my desire and my attraction towards you, but just let it be. and move with it and feel with it. That this notion of exfoliating comes with a certain sense of acceptance and belonging, to let that sensuality unfold. And I think with all of the work in water, this kind of gave me this great permission for an unfolding sensuality, which maybe is not so allowed in many contexts where people don't feel safe to express what they feel and what they think. For Manning, she also says, desire is expressed not only in gestures that reach out for objects and people around them, but also in bodies that inhabit space, orientate and displace themselves towards others. And I really started to, think about desire as a way of thinking about otherness. As like, okay, I move towards, I orientate in space towards where I feel attracted or I feel comfortable in a way. It's an interesting conundrum in contact improvisation, because we don't just go to, well, maybe we do go towards, but is that really, when I have an idea of what's going to happen, it's not a mutual meeting, it's not a finding out what could emerge together, which, as I understood, was the original proposal that Steve Paxton brought to contact improvisation. So in many of these light touch practices or techniques that I started to think about and gain some inspiration through my work in water, I started to think about how can what we want or what we think be supported by more fluid states or influence. Movement of water, movement of momentum, dissolving, letting things go, letting things disintegrate, being permeable, being open, not holding on to, as ways of practicing contact improvisation, as ways of embodying touch also. So these are some of the light touch techniques that I've named, and there's actually some of the glyphs down here with small descriptions if you want to have a look or have a closer. Come on, grab some of these little. So thinking about agency, the agency of embodiment, and thinking about desire as a reference point for this otherness and the emotions that we hold, and that kind of had me thinking a lot about this notion of desire and Manning's acknowledgement that in touch we orientate by way of desire, we orientate to where we feel comfort, where we feel attraction, and we move away from what we dislike. We move towards what we like, we move away from what we dislike. It's a very simple way of thinking about desire, not something sexual, but just something just by way of how we organise ourselves as bodies and space. But in the world of consent, this is a quote from Catherine Agel, who has written a lot about consent and wrote actually a book called Tomorrow Sex Will Be Good Again, Women and Desire in the Age of Consent. And her writing specifically is orientated towards women, but Catherine Angel largely acknowledges that desire is something relational, and for people to express what they want, Angel argues that that depends on our conditions, the conditions of the context, the conditions of race, gender, culture, that is for some people difficult in certain contexts. So to be able to go towards, to say this doesn't feel very comfortable, or to express a movement towards comfort, or to is maybe compromise for some people in certain spaces. So while I was looking at maybe practices that could hold a sense of desire, not in a direct use of the term, like use, that desire might be something that we find out together on a mutual pathway. Like I wanted to and came to acknowledge that desire is something that is oppressed for many people, to be able to move towards, to be able to say. So I was thinking a lot about agency. And as I came to investigate the deep touch techniques, my concerns were largely around agency. How dancers express themselves, how they communicate. In the research with deep touch that started off with all sorts of descriptions of weight, mass-related touch, touch that was meaty or pressured, touch that goes through layers, or that involves reaching into structure, that may be profound and subtle. I started off with these weighted kind of descriptions of touch. I moved with the lab group that I had of these dancers in Berlin. And rather than discussing weight or pressure or structure, the dancers were much more interested in talking about what it means to be touched deeply. And there I started to think about intimacy. There's a writer called Elizabeth Povinelli who describes intimacy as a recognition of change, a recognition that I'm transformed by you in your presence. That you change me in some way. And that perhaps you're changed also. That we're effectual. And so I started to think about, can I integrate now some of this further research with listening, with space, with being with space, with being with fluidity, with being with permeability, as well as these other things that we do in contact. It could be working with weight, giving weight. And so I started to think about slowness, time, and just, they're not new. We do these things in contact improvisation. They're not necessarily mine, but in all of these techniques that I've named as deep touch techniques, what I've added to these practices is just this aspect of space, of giving and allowing for time or space in how we come into contact, to create that space for recognition, for maybe this waver of, is there really consent here to be together for this moment? And can I let go of all the not knowing, my feelings, my emotions, the stories that might be in the background, and just be really here with you? back to me now. Like, this is. Did I just close that? Yes, okay, here we go. This is we come back to something that Steve Paxton said early on. And it's in a way moving back to the beginning by sharing whose focus on physics, our meetings. Steve Braxton said, I stress that the dancers are people, not in social sense, but in the animal sense, in this kind of dancing. That they should not smile, should not make eye contact, should not talk, that they should just be there as animals, as bundles of nerves, masses, and bones, touching the other bundle and letting that be the work. And at the same time, this does fail to acknowledge the emotions, the histories of slavery that might be felt, but not acknowledged. When different people meet from different ethnicities and backgrounds. And that's still there. That's still there. So in trying to think about how we negotiate all of this stuff, that when we meet in touch, in so much closeness, contact, I have developed this vocabulary of touch techniques that may be in some way of use for thinking about how permeable we are. And I think in these deep touch techniques of like this aspect of weight, what it can give is this real proprioception that, oh, I'm here as a bundle of nerves, and as fat, and as bone, and that I'm really here. That when there's pressure, and when there's weight, or when there's a reaching into structure that has space or has permission, that actually, like, I feel this rooting into the earth, and I feel a presence that I have agency, and I can self-express, and I can move away from or towards. So, in many of what the deep touch techniques is an aspect of agency that can be very physical. But in adding an aspect of time, of space, my hope is that perhaps we can expand that possibility, that there be also an intimacy that acknowledges what we don't know and what might be being felt on other layers that needs to be reconciled with. So, I have this touch vocabulary that I'm now teaching and sharing, and I hope that you will also share. And yeah, this is a quite major outcome of the research, that's a kind of very tangible outcome. That has, both informed my teaching, but also some of the performances that I've made. So this vocabulary of touch has shaped a number of performances that I have made over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. So I have a listening touch performance, which in a way, it's a gallery performance, in a way demonstrates listening, and gallery visitors can experience touch with a touch guide that is not expecting or wanting anything from them, but is just receiving them. So it's a little bit like many of the things we perhaps do when we practice following hands yesterday in my class. It's a practice where the touch guides have to also practice listening. The unveiling is another performance. It's a slow undressing ritual, bringing awareness both to the touch of our clothes with space. I can talk more about these maybe in a moment. Or you can come and see one of my performances. And the pleasure patchwork. And I want to share a few images from this piece because I feel it speaks so much to some of the notions of receptive touch or listening touch that's receiving information, that's in a way permeable to emotions, to thought, not holding necessarily, but also the way in which as we move into the world, as I move towards what I'm attracted to or away from, that maybe towards is easier to express my desire, that touch is implicit. Touch reaches out as we, as dancers, move and gesture out into the space around us. And these forms started to emerge in my drawings, like these kind of, in a way, like phallic forms. But I really was also appreciating the way that these forms were also like enfolded spaces. So it's starting to think about, okay, you know, they also reference, ironically, like the cells in our digestive tract and the skin cells that have this huge surface area in order to take in more information. So from the drawings, I developed this blanket installation called the Pleasure Patchwork. And I work with this sculptor from South Germany. So she fabricated the blanket. She's a specialist in crochet sculptures. And so I designed the blanket, we designed it somewhat together. And it is a patchwork piece, so like a patchwork blanket, got many pieces, and some of them are very big, and you can get inside of them.
Wow.
You can put them in your arms. But they're, spaces in which you can you can turn them inside out. And they have a huge, it's a lamb's wool blanket, so it's heavy. And it's an installation piece. And it creates an environment for visitors to move and touch with the blanket. And I've exhibited it a number of times now, where performers also are interacting with the blanket and are exploring some of the touch techniques of spreading, of hovering, of expanding, and of diving into the density of also this knit.
Does it come apart and then back together?
So this was an early exhibition of Pleasure Patchwork, the photograph you see here, where we were. She was, as you can see, Katerina was the sculptor of the blanket, so she was sewing the pieces together in this first exhibition. So there's a few references from my talk here with you. And if you would like to experience more of the touch vocabulary, I'm teaching this touch vocabulary in my touch training in Berlin. These are the dates for it this year, but I'll most likely do it again next year. If you would like to be in Europe, or thinking about being in Europe. And if you just want to stay in touch, then you can leave me your email and I will share with you what I'm doing.
how you think about it is like an undisturbed baseline that exists in a vacuum, and then the otherness comes in engaging with the outside world, or like how are you envisioning that?
The otherness emerges
Yeah.
in interaction.
Okay.
Yeah. I come into the contact space and I feel tired, but you know, maybe I want to dance with this person. I have to negotiate this exhaustion and this desire to dance. You know, that this could also be the otherness. That's like uncomfortable, or it could be a strong emotion like that arises in interaction. A question could be more physical, could be, it's emergent.
Sorry, I have like
Yeah.
seven,
Sure.
but I mean, I don't have to ask all of them. And then when you were talking about desire, I was thinking about German, there was like Hochbe gerne, like, because it seems like desire can be such a weighted word.
Yeah.
So would those be kind of a more innocuous way of expressing feeling that just to want?
Intention?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just,
I think like, and that's also something like in healthcare, on a level of consent, the idea that you like being able to identify your intention, why you're going to touch somebody. I'm going to lift you out of bed, or go to look behind, or check your ear, that there might be touch that's involved in the checkup of a medical practitioner. Like being able to identify the intention is key in terms of diaries of consent. So intentionality, and there's no way about what you want to do.
I'm curious, like kind of along those lines, I noticed the soft touch, the deep touch all had hands in it, and not so for the soft touch. I'm curious if that was an intentional choice or why, if so.
The imagery.
Yeah, the glyphs or when you
Nice that you noticed that. I mean, I hadn't really thought about that. Like in terms of squeezing and compression, I don't like in teaching that, in practicing that. Like my association is not just with the hands, but actually something that you could actually practice on different parts of the body.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious because I noticed hands in all the ones, just the ones you showed anyway.
Not intention.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I'm curious about the demographics of the people you interviewed.
Demographics of the participants.
Yeah. In the lab group.
Or wherever you were gathering your data.
Freiburg.
So, and the Freiburg Festival is largely like experienced teachers. Yeah, like from different countries. Like Freiburg is a very international festival. In the lab group, there was quite a range of different people. Most of them practicing contact improvisation for quite a long time. There was also somebody with an amputated leg in that group. There's a Kartik, who's an Indian dancer, but then majoritively white, I'd say. Experienced contact dancers. Also, several of them somatic practitioners.
I mean, this might be kind of an unfair question or a very difficult question, but I guess I'm curious how you imagine the research would be impacted if it was sort of redone with, like done a second time with non-dancers, people who don't have the comfort and experience level that the people who came to us.
Interesting you say that, because at the beginning of the research, like I held a few lab groups. There's a few different forms of lab that try out these touch techniques that were sort of emerging in my mind, play with them a bit more loosely. And there was also like some lab groups that I held like in Mexico. There was a lab, I was at camp with some people that were also at camp, which was a kind of community research project. And I held a lab there, and I'd say that the group of dancers were not like all very experienced contact improvisers. And actually some of their feedback was really, really valuable and quite enlightening in terms of thinking about what are the kind of questions that might be different that are coming up with experienced teachers or practitioners compared to those dancers. And actually I speak to that in one of the chapters on live touch. And maybe again coming to the demographic, like some of the field research took place in Mexico in terms of water dance and aquatic investigation of CI. And I really have quite traced some of the practices of specialist aquatic CI mixes, you know, that are mixing contact improvisation and aquatic therapy. And so I very much followed the work of Andrea Schiel and also Manuela Blanchard, but Andrea Schiel specifically had like quite an influence, like interviews that I had with her, reflections from her, and that, yeah, informed and shaped.
Hey, Roz, thank you for this beautiful talk and for your really special research. I just need to say that we haven't said that. Like, we clap for you, and I just need to say that. Yeah, wowza, mega work. Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing it. I have like a detailish question that we don't need to get into here, but it was curious for me. So the Paxton quote that you mentioned toward the end, is that the same reference that you were talking, like at the very beginning you said something that really struck me, that about Steve Paxton saying leave the social differences out? Was that the same reference or was that something else?
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few references that could be taken from Steve Paxton that is about him wanting to put aside the social.
It's
the
physics,
social.
not chemistry.
Yeah,
sure,
That's
that
those
one.
kind of arguments that have been
Yeah.
kind of continuously challenged and pressed.
Totally. Yeah. Well, the physics, not chemistry one, sure. But I was curious, especially when you said social differences, and I was like, oh, yeah. And so
I mean, they're socialized in different ways.
totally. Yeah, we can talk about that. I'd love to check in about that.
But like, I mean, social etiquettes, I guess, or like, you know, some people have more conservative social views and more liberal social views.
Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot.
No,
Yeah,
that's the moment for it. Put me on the spot.
Oh no, I'm like, name me your quote. I mean, you might not know off the top of your head.
What, that quote there?
No, from the beginning of your talk with like the social.
I didn't use a quote. I just spoke to kind of in like summarizing way.
Last question. I was wondering if you defined touch itself and maybe this is like in your more like the wordy parts of things. You talked a lot and all about the dialogue of like tactile input and mechanoreceptors and like that, how it impacts the homunculus and how that then alters the physical state, and then like kind of that steady flow of internal responses to touch, stereognosis, how we process a touch, and then how engaging with the environment, like kind of like it's like an electric circuit where there's constantly a flow of energy in and out.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I mean, I took some influence by neuroscientists that have been researching touch. And me just talking to the homunculus, or the way in which the hands have got atactile kind of wiring is different to the C-tactile fibers of the skin where we have hair, and this has been more associated with what's called effective touch, touch that kind of is how we do social bonding, how it kind of is kind of more stimulating associations with emotion, slower. I have a lot of like thoughts about this. I think there's a lot possibility to do more research actually in contact, like on this level. Yeah, and this notion that we do social bonding by touching the hairs. I mean, this is something neuroscientists have said that like it's meant to be like 2.5 or 2 centimeters a minute. Like we stroke the hair slowly. This is how we socially bond. Like it's very very specific, and I think it's like.
2.5 minutes.
Yeah, like this is meant to be the most effective way we build social bonds. Like these kind of bonds between romantic partners or between parents and children, like caregiving touch, nurturing touch. And I think it's really interesting research, but maybe there like, and I think it's also something where I find that perhaps loads of teachers have rather than use terms such as like stroking or caressing, prefer to use terms such as brushing or sliding, because they don't have these social bonding connotations or romantic connotations. I think there's more research there that could be done, but I thought it was interesting on this level of looking at space and light touch and like bringing in space as an aspect of more, maybe also creating space for more intimacy, like more sense of recognition. And I think that's where I'm actually more interested in, like that needs even more research to think about intimacy beyond its sensual or sexual connotations. Same with the term desire. Like I feel that those are places where there's room for a lot more research.
I have to share, I wrote an article for Contact Quarterly years ago on contact improvisation and intervention in geriatrics to address touch deprivation as people age.
But I think just to be saying like on this thing of like intimacy, like the depth of connection that could be had, it doesn't just rely on stroking 2.5 centimeters a minute. Like that we can experience. I think like maybe the touch vocabulary that I've defined has started to like pick apart a bit more.
I found it because it's like the child that attempt to like quantify these things is not really.
I think it's like being able to draw upon that research, like as a point of reflection, was really valuable for me. Like it started me thinking, making new links. So I'm great that there's some neuroscientists doing it out there. What I can't do.
I'm curious, when you do these workshops and you teach in Germany, are you teaching in German?
No.
Have you? And so
I do teach yoga in German. No, sometimes I teach dance in German. Actually, it's true. Sometimes I do teach in German in Germany. Yeah.
I'm really curious about the universality of the words accompanying the vocabulary of touch.
Yeah, and I think this is like a magic. Teachers are also like artists in how they're like communicating and articulating, whether they're giving reference to the politics of touch or not. It's an art, and I think to give those insights or
that intersection of culture and language.
It's an art, and that's where I say, like in Germany, I'm majoritarily speaking in English, teaching in English, because I have developed a certain vocabulary that I feel more comfortable, and I feel more fluid communicating, and it just takes time. Like it takes time to work on that. Maybe one day I'll get better. I'm going here. Maybe just okay. Three more over here. We dance. We dance it out.
Touch is like something we all as one entity rather than two separate bodies. And it can happen in a trio, in a quartet it's rare, but in this long dance that you have experienced, probably is, I'm just curious about it, but besides this otherness or individuality that we lean sometimes towards, in contact or in other places related to movement or any other things, but what I'm trying to get to is basically, have you ever also looked into that aspect of contact and touch that we get to experience in CI, which is basically feeling of this deep connection, deep connectedness, rather than that separateness or the otherness. You see, like
Yeah, and I think in this deep touch, like what it means to be touched deeply, like Vera started to like always looking at that, and actually like there's a podcast that I made, which is about deep touch specifically, and maybe I didn't speak to it so much, but this thing of intimacy, of seeing it, like this recognition that I'm changed by you in the present, and you're changed also, that we've changed, that like I realise that something there becomes an enabler sometimes in these deep interactions, where like I can let go of the story, you can let go of these other things and move into like new places. Something maybe also in the partnerships or multiple partnerships that gives opens up possibility for something new, a new way of doing, new way of moving, changing habitual patterns, like transformative movements.
Right, not like actually having the role of either a follower or leader, but there is that kind of interchangeable, or there's, even you might say there's really no follower or leader, but there's that out there. I think
Yeah,
that's the
this third thing.
sort of reference.
Yeah, not falling into a pattern.
Is what dance is about,
And I think that can happen, like that intimacy can happen with oneself as well as with a partner. That something can be transforming in and through a relationship that is felt maybe more on an individual level than even the partner level. Like the ability to make change or do something different. Do something, yeah. This deep touch podcast like refers very much to the chapter that I wrote on deep touch, and like how I'm talking now. I'm like talking to in a way, an experience that a dancer had in the lab research that I did, where she like encountered this moment in touch, where like she had this whole kind of story of like some cinema romance in her mind, that there was this like touch in cinema, like it was like first touch, first time falling in love, and like she was able, by being with the wave, being with the breath, to kind of let go of that and like be present in the touch. So something new could emerge, so something different could happen in the mutuality of their meeting and presence that was open enough to something. Okay. There were some questions at the back here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you've turned this research into a training that you do, right? And my question is, like, what's your intention or hope or dream for the impact of that training?
Well, the training is mainly directed towards dancers. I'm teaching contact improvisation, and I'm teaching these touch techniques in the realm of dance. But I sense and feel that this vocabulary of touch could be of value for people beyond dance. And this year is my wish to make a book called The Touch Guide, which will basically be a more visual guide to this touch vocabulary that has many of my drawings in, so it'll be quite a colourful book, more like an art book that has this touch vocabulary in, but that could be used potentially by dancers in the studio, but also by health practitioners or like people working with touch in other professional realms of bodywork, therapy, or healthcare, social care. maybe, or they're just interested in exploring touch in their personal lives or relationship therapy. Yeah, I'm also just kind of inspired by some of these things I pointed to where there's possibilities to do further research in terms of like thinking about how dance is orientated by way of desire or by aspects of things that come up through the research to do with intimacy that I feel like, I'd be keen to do more research. So for me it's not, it's like, it's something I've done, but it's also, it's pushing me forward into new things and further research. Okay. Erin, Alessandra, did you have a question?
Yeah,
Just because then,
because
like, there's different voices. Okay.
I'm curious about something you mentioned, Roz, with, you said that just kind of in the middle of your talk, and you were talking about how originally one of the original premises of Contact was we meet each other and let's see what happens, and my sense was that there was, but then you said that's not really what's going on now. Could you say a little bit more about that? You don't think we're improvising now? We're not coming to it with that same, or what's the difference for you now?
Well, I mean, that Steve Paxton's focus and like was on the physics of working with gravity, momentum, and like what happens when we come with these physical forces, and how do we move together, like and can we find a mutuality? How can we collaborate with this? But the questions of chemistry, all this other stuff that's like of inclusion or of social justice that like has been in dialogue and kind of moved over topics of consent, boundaries, and like fleshing out, like using the term otherness was in a way to address some of this stuff that's like a lot of this stuff, in one way, in one way. And I think that now we have all these pattern forms that's like also developed, and this is like creates a certain familiarity that's like repeated patterns, and I think that that's something that maybe limits as well, like what we're meeting when we're actually meeting in touch. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted just to bring a thing from a friend, Carola Robles, and she said that the senses are an extension of the touch. And I find it very beautiful because the skin unfolds towards inside here as well. And I think I can touch with the eye, I can be touched very deeply for what you say. So I know you are working with but I found interesting to bring these, that the senses are an extension of the touch.
It's your next PhD.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that talk about that in some ways or other, because like scientists or like and Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen will also talk about like touch being the first sense to develop in the womb, like along with movement, and so touch and movement are kind of implicit, like of moving out, but then like Erin Manning also kind of makes reference to what you're saying, like as in like touch is like awakening, or as I read Erin Manning, maybe this is my mind, like it is awakening the other senses, and that's my experience also, like that, like the stimulation of touch kind of can enliven other senses of taste, of smell, and like of sight, and I think there's more than 5 senses. But in the unveiling, this slow undressing performance, like the actual practice that I developed actually about bringing together the sense of touch and the digestive tract. So as a way of like feeling touch deeply from the periphery, so from space, from touch the edges of the skin, the clothes that slide over our skin, to kind of feel it all the way to the depth of the digestive tract, like in a way through the fascia, but all the way through to the deep organs. And I was kind of interested in exploring that because I was like, I'm kind of feeling in a way that the digestive tract, when I embody that through the work that I do with body mind centering, it becomes so expressive. And like, oh well, can I bring these two together to like actually express what's felt or to feel more deeply, the sense of touch all the way through the body, and then allow it just to express or exfoliate. Yeah, I think it's a super nice to bring this together.
And there is another beautiful thing that I thought, that if we take the relation with the space, the skin is the deeper layer that we have. So if I consider what's around, the skin is deeper with the other. Yeah. So it depends on the perspective.
It can be a barrier.
Deep inside the body and deep in the space around. So the skin is, for me, a question. What's deeper for me? It's a light touch or a pressure touch. Most of times is the light touch that I feel deeper. So, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we should go and jam.